Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. If you're thinking about moving to Atlanta, Georgia, you might want to know what the pros and cons are. Let's talk about that right now. As always, if you're thinking about moving to Atlanta or you just want to know what it's like to live here, feel free to call or text, email me anytime. I'm more than happy to help. Thank you so much to everyone who has reached out to me asking me about Atlanta, Georgia. My favorite thing to do in the world is help people get acquainted with my hometown. Right off the bat, one of the biggest benefits of living in Atlanta, Georgia is just how many trees and green space and nature we have here in Atlanta, Georgia. Many people who come from other states and other parts of the world very quickly see that Georgia and the city of Atlanta really have a lot more nature than most people realize. The city of Atlanta is described as a city in the woods, and that's because we really have trees everywhere, not only in the suburbs of Atlanta, but also in the city of Atlanta. No matter what part of Metro Atlanta you live in, it's very easy to drive to a park or find some kind of green space nearby because they really are all over the city. Another big benefit of living in Atlanta, Georgia is that a lot of people are starting to work virtually here in Atlanta. We really have a very big tech industry in Atlanta, so it's becoming more and more common for people to work from home, which has in turn kind of alleviated some of the traffic problem that we have here in Atlanta. I know people talk about the traffic in Atlanta all the time. And so thankfully, that kind of work from home has really started to help out a lot with the amount of traffic that we have here. Now, it hasn't completely taken care of the problem. We certainly still do have some traffic problems, but it has alleviated the problem some. Another benefit is that Atlanta is a major metropolitan city, even having the busiest airport in the world. I think many people fail to realize that Atlanta is as big of a city as New York or LA or Houston. We really have all of the amenities that come from having a major metropolitan city, but also having the benefits of the suburbs around Atlanta. So it's very easy to have those big city amenities, but also live in the suburbs where it's a little quieter, it's a little more family friendly. And then just north of the city of Atlanta is the North Georgia mountains, cities like Blue Ridge, Ellijay, Helen, and then on the east side of Atlanta, again about 2 hours, is the coast in Savannah, Georgia. So we have this major metropolitan city very close to all of this nature, and that really is one of the things that makes Atlanta so special. We can't fail to mention the cost of living in Atlanta, Georgia. Traditionally speaking, the southern parts of the United States have always had lower cost of living, lower average home values, and Atlanta is no different. But what makes Atlanta unique is that it's a major city with this lower cost of living. So many people in the last few years have been coming from all over the country to Atlanta to get the benefits of that lower cost of living, but still have those amenities of having a big city. And then another benefit of Atlanta that I don't think many people realize is that because we have so many suburbs around the city of Atlanta, there really is a very wide variety of kinds of suburbs. No matter what kind of lifestyle you're looking for, it's very possible to find that in one of the suburbs around Atlanta. Take, for example, cities like Milton, Georgia, lots of horse farms, lots of green space, lots of farmland. This kind of suburb of Atlanta is very rural and not very many people live there. So it's very easy to get around. You don't have neighbors on top of each other in Milton. Comparatively speaking, we have cities like Sandy Springs or Vinings. These cities are right on the edge of Atlanta, and many parts of Sandy Springs or Vinings even feel like Atlanta, having that kind of urban feel, but still is one of those suburbs that has neighborhoods with HOAs and sporadic shopping here and there. So very close to Atlanta, but still accommodating for the people who don't quite want to live in the city of Atlanta. Now let's talk about some of the bad parts about living in Atlanta, Georgia. Of course, every city has the negative sides, and we certainly need to talk about that when it comes to Atlanta, if you're moving to Atlanta, Georgia, you certainly want to know what the cons are of living here. One big downside about living in Atlanta, Georgia, is that home prices here have risen dramatically in the last couple years. Now, I know home prices have risen dramatically all over the country, maybe even all over the world, but for the most part, I believe it's widely accepted that Atlanta had a increase in home values more so than other parts of the country. I think that has to do with the lower cost of living here and the amount of people who are moving to Atlanta from other parts of the country. And this has raised home values here significantly. For example, 2 or 3 years ago, the average home value in Atlanta was about 350. Today, the average home value is closer to 450, maybe even 500. So while the cost of living here in Atlanta is low, it is certainly increasing very quickly. Another downside about living in Atlanta, Georgia, is that traditionally jobs have always paid less in the South, including Atlanta, Georgia. That may be having to do something with the cost of living being lower in the South and in Georgia, but for many reasons, the jobs have always paid less in Georgia. So this might not be such a bad thing if you're working virtually and your employer is maybe in a different state in the US or a different part of the world. But keep in mind, if you're moving to Atlanta, Georgia, traditionally we've always had lower paying jobs here. And then another big one for many people is the school ratings. School ratings is a very important priority for a lot of people who are finding a new place to live. And historically, Atlanta has not really done well with school ratings. And it's not really just the city of Atlanta, it's all of Georgia in general. Now, there are some suburbs, especially the ones that we talk about on this channel, that do have good school ratings. Cities like Marietta, Alpharetta, many of the cities in Gwinnett County, like Duluth, Beaufort, also Suwanee, these cities do have excellent school ratings. Most of the time, those school ratings are about an 8 or a 9 or even 10 out of 10. But as for the majority of the suburbs around Atlanta, and even the schools in Atlanta, the school ratings are not so great. Take, for example, some of the suburbs on the south side of Metro Atlanta where the average school rating is a 3 or a 4 out of 10. And in the city of Atlanta, the average school rating is a 5 or a 6 out of 10. For many people, that's unacceptable and not really what you want to see when you're moving into a new city. Keep in mind that many people who have children in the city of Atlanta who want to go to better schools do go to private schools. Private schools is a very common option for many people in the city of Atlanta. And then another downside of living in Atlanta is that we've always had bad infrastructure here. As long as I've lived in Atlanta, which is pretty much my whole life, the infrastructure here has never been good. We've always had problems. By infrastructure, I mean things like the power line poles, the water, gas lines, internet providers, those kinds of things have always been kind of behind the times a little bit. It may sound crazy if you're in another part of the country, but here in Georgia, it doesn't take much to have power outages citywide. Just a storm or the wind blowing, something simple like that very often causes power outages all across a city. And as I've talked about in other videos before, I believe this has to do with the fact that the power lines here are above ground mostly and on power line poles that look like they're 100 years old. And, the city just unfortunately doesn't do a great job of maintaining those power lines and those structures. And it's not just electricity. It's, like I said, it's also water. It's also gas lines. It's, take for example, internet. You would think this day and age, whenever you buy a home in a major city, of course, the home is going to have high-speed internet, but not the case here in Georgia. When you are buying a home in Georgia, you do want to check with the internet provider to see if the home that you're considering purchasing has access to high-speed internet. When I purchased my home in Marietta, there was not high-speed internet here, and the internet provider had to come and lay the foundation for the internet for high-speed internet. And so you can't really take that for granted here in Georgia. Unfortunately, not all the homes have high-speed internet. Okay, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I've got 2 more bonus tips for you, one benefit and one bad side. One more pro about living in Atlanta is that we do have a lot of investment properties. Because the cost of living here in Atlanta is so low, we also have a lot of investment properties that are even lower. It's very possible to find investment properties as low as 100 or even 200,000. And for many people in other parts of the country, that kind of price for an investment property is amazing. And fortunately, we still do have those kinds of opportunities here in Georgia. And then one more downside about living in Atlanta is that many people who come here from other parts of the state right off the bat realize that we have a lot of homes here with deferred maintenance. For some reason, it tends to be a common problem with many of the homes here. It may have to do with the lower cost of living, or maybe it has to do with the jobs paying less, but deferred maintenance on homes happens to be a very common issue here. Things like 20-year-old roofs, or things like gutters not being well taken care of, trees that are growing too close to homes. These kinds of things you would think are things that a homeowner would normally take care of are sometimes an issue here in Georgia. No matter what home you're thinking about buying, you certainly want to have a home inspector out to check out the different parts of the home to make sure that there aren't any problems with the home. If you want to know more about what it's like to live in Atlanta, be sure to check out this video. I'll see you there.